next speaker is Hasia Diner, who's already spoken, so you know her. She's the Paul and Sylvia Steinberg Professor of American Jewish History at NYU, with a joint appointment in the Departments of History and the Skirball Department of Hebrew Judaic Studies. And she's the director of the Goldstein-Gorin Center for American Jewish History. She's the author of many books, and I'm going to name only a few more recent ones, including Lower East Side Memories, The Jewish Place in America, Hungering for America, Italian, Irish, and Jewish Foodways in the Age of Migration, The Jews of the United States, 1654 to 2000, and We Remember with Reverence and Love, American Jews and the Myth of Silence After the Holocaust. In this year, Yale University Press will publish her newest book, Roads Taken, The Great Jewish Migration and the Peddlers Who Made It Possible. And this morning, she's going to speak on Food on the Road, Immigrant Jewish Peddlers and Their Non-Jewish Customers. Hasia.
Well, again, thank you all for being here. For those students who were in my class, I think so many of these themes must be so familiar that I feel a kind of sense of completing a circle between what went on in the class and what you're hearing now. So I feel very good about that. So Marion, Professor Kaplan just gave you the title of this talk as it appears on the program, Food on the Road, Immigrant Jewish Peddlers and Their Non-Jewish Customers. But in fact, I could have given a different title, maybe a little more exciting, and it could have been called, quote, They Called Them the Egg Eaters. This phrase is derived from a recorded episode that has been appeared in a number of books, and it told of the phenomenon whereby a group of Native Americans, Cherokee Indian, in the middle of the 19th century, who had contact, and about the Cherokee Indians in the middle of the latter part of the 19th century, who, like many Americans, and indeed like millions of people on the New World, around the New World, had contact with Jewish peddlers. Okay, that is, men who put packs on their backs and walked the road selling from house to house. Like others who bought from Jewish peddlers, the Cherokee Indians developed very positive and amicable relationships with these men who had come into their homes, who sold them needles and thread, watches, jewelry, eyeglasses, belts, all kinds of small and slightly larger consumer goods. All of the peddlers were newly arrived immigrant Jewish men from someplace in Europe or the Ottoman Empire. Wherever they went, they asked, as they asked their Cherokee customers, if they might lodge with them for the night after a long day on the road. But entering the homes of their Cherokee customers, just like entering the homes of Boers in South Africa, Catholic farmers in Ireland, Midwestern Protestant farmers in the American heartland, African American customers in the Deep South, going into the home of their customers, particularly if they were going to sleep there, posed a problem for the Jewish peddler. What would they eat? Observing to one degree or another the restrictions of the Jewish dietary code meant that Jewish peddlers could not easily or automatically partake of that what came out of their customers' pots. And so in the case of the Cherokee, and this one little comment, we are left with a particular assumption that these men who sold to this native population in the American West would be willing to eat what their hosts served them if they were eggs. The eggs were cooked in their shells, and so therefore it didn't matter if the pot had at one point or another had something unkosher in it, the egg was okay. And so whenever these peddlers came into the homes of the Cherokee, they would eat eggs and eggs only. And we don't know what happened to their cholesterol levels, but that seems to be what they ate. This small anecdote contains within it a universe of meaning in terms of understanding something about international migration, religion, making a living, and consumption in two senses of the word. The peddlers, for one thing, functioned as the purveyors of consumer goods. They, in fact, in many cases, taught their customers how to consume various items. And consumption, in the sense that these men had to think, plan, fret, make decisions over the matter of their consumption, what to eat and how to eat while on the road. I want to explore two different aspects of the role of food in the history of Jewish peddling in a range of migration destinations, which I'll specify in a moment, and think about the larger historic consequence of this mundane occupation, peddling, and the mundane issue of asking for something to eat. So first is the challenge which peddling posed to Jews when it came out to figuring out how and what to sustain their bodies while on the road. And secondly, the cultural opportunities they had when they sat down to eat in their customers' homes, what they learned from their customers, and what their customers learned from them. These two matters provide us with a way to reflect upon a very important element in every history of food, which is that food has always functioned as both a barrier to cross-cultural contact, and it has also served as a bridge between people, getting them to learn and taste something of each other's cuisine. These two matters help us see some connection between Jewish peddling and the ways in which Jews came to be accepted in their destination lands, and the impact of peddling on the kinds of religious practices which developed there. Now let me just take 1 second to define peddlers. I'm looking at, and they are all men. Okay, in Europe, it was actually not uncommon for Jewish women to peddle, but in the New World, okay, it was only men. They were not stationary merchants. They did not have a stall or a stand or a store, but rather they went into their customers' homes, farm to farm, house to house, mining camp to mining camp, plantation to plantation, to sell goods one by one. They were also not traveling salesmen. The traveling salesman was an employee of a company or a corporation which provided a particular set of goods, set the price, designated how to keep records, and so on. These men, who I now call my peddlers, were independent and could improvise as they defined and learned what the market what customers wanted. Now, peddling had long been a Jewish occupation and went back centuries. It was one of the most common Jewish occupations in Europe, Central Europe, much of Eastern Europe. It was a common Jewish occupation in the Ottoman Empire, and Jewish selling from house to house gave Jewish life much of its internal and external dynamics. But from the 18th century onward, as Jews participated in what we call the Great Jewish Migration, peddling provided Jews from Central and Eastern Europe, as well as from the Ottoman Empire, an effective means by which they could enhance their chances of making a living by going out to new places, to discovering for themselves new worlds. And obviously they weren't discovering it for themselves, but they were so much connected to the European penetration of the world through colonialism. That is, peddling, the Jews' familiar occupation, became caught up with and facilitated this great migration. About 3.5 million Jews from the end of the 18th century through the 1920s left the countries and the places of their birth and went out on the world. About 85 to 90% of them came to the United States, but they also went out to the British Isles, Canada, Central and South America, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. So all the places that either were discovered by European colonialism or which went through tremendous modernization of their agriculture and commercialization, giving relatively poor people for the first time money, cash, to put in their pockets from which they could buy eyeglasses and pictures to put up on the wall and all sorts of other sundry goods. Now, the history of Jewish peddling in each New World country has a history of its own, whether in North America or South America, Ireland or Wales, Sweden or South Africa. Each has its own story, but I want to emphasize certain common characteristics shared by all New World Jewish peddlers, regardless of country and continent, and how food became a central matter in making this occupation possible and allowing this occupation to pave the way for Jewish settlement and Jewish integration. The young Jewish man who decided to leave, let's say, Alsace or Lithuania, two major centers of peddlers, and try his luck in the Mississippi Delta, the Pacific Northwest, the Transvaal of South Africa, the Australian outback, the Irish Midlands, the sugar cane plantations of Cuba, or the mining regions of Wales, went to places where there were no string of Jewish settlements where they could stop at the end of the day. That is, from sunup to sundown, they only interacted with non-Jews. They spent, indeed, the days of the week among their customers, women in particular, because most of their customers were women, depending upon these customers, all non-Jews, mostly Christian in these places, although some were also of Aboriginal religions, depending upon their customers for a place to sleep and food to eat before they would set out on the road the next morning. Since Jewish peddlers divided up the countryside among themselves, no one peddler encroaching on anyone else's territory, they lived devoid of contact with other Jews from basically 5 days of the week. New World Jewish peddlers organized their selling lives in such a way as to be able, on the Sabbath, to get back to the closest enclave of Jewish life. The life history of many of these immigrant peddlers repeatedly noted how their lives marched according to a kind of weekly rhythm. They went out on their routes on Sunday or Monday, returned by Friday to whatever existed as a Jewish hub of life for food, okay, for the Sabbath meal, for fellowship, for rest, and also, by the way, to pay back their creditors for the goods that they had sold and to fill up their packs and then go out on the road again. Joseph Jacob, in his 1919 book, a very defensive study called The Jewish Contribution to Civilization, described how in England, which in terms of the New World Jewish migration served as a new world for the Jews, quote, it was customary for the Jews of the seaport towns to go out every Monday morning to neighboring villages as hawkers who would return in time for the Friday night meal. These hawkers, which was the British term of choice for peddler, came to be known within the Jewish community as wachers, so wach being the Yiddish or German word for week. In Ireland, to which several thousand Lithuanian Jews immigrated after the 1880s, and where nearly all Jewish men peddled at one time or another, Jews were called by themselves and by their customers weekly men. Okay, the ones who showed up week after week at the farmhouse door, ready to collect payment for something purchased the week before, and hopefully to entice the customer to buy something new. In much of South America, they were called semananiks. Okay, semana being the Spanish word for week. In the histories of one Jewish community after another, telling the story from the from the end of the 18th century in England, and then going until the 1920s into Central South America. The descriptions always include the fact that there was always one or two Jewish homes where on the weekend all the peddlers would gather. In Natchez, Mississippi, there was, quote, the Milstein House, where many of the peddlers who came home after a week would gather on the Sabbath. Okay, so if the Sabbath, from Friday afternoon till either Sunday or Monday morning, was spent in the little Jewish hub, or could even be a larger Jewish cities, 4 or 5 nights of the week, the peddler was, nights and days of the week, the peddler was out on the road and was faced with the immediate crisis of where to sleep and what to eat. Now, he certainly could sleep on the ground. He could spread his cloak out on some field or in some forest, maybe cover himself with a sack or two and try to prevent the chills from pervading his body. If he had graduated from being a foot peddler to be a wagon peddler, he could sleep in the back of his wagon. I guess that would be not so terrible. He could, if he was concerned with kashrut, and it seems to be that most of them had some level of concern about this, they could carry some food with them. They could stick some loaves of dark bread in their satchel. They might stock up with nuts or dried fruit, maybe even some sausage, some other kind of preserved kosher meat. But in the main, what they wanted to do was sleep in a customer's home. Indeed, when European Jewish immigrants and Ottoman Jewish immigrants first arrive in whatever their New World destination, facilitated by a townsman or a relative who had come first, the townsperson would write out in whatever the language was, English, Spanish, French, Mayan, Gaelic, Swedish, phrases. So since the immigrant didn't know the new language, the piece of paper would have in Hebrew letters, good morning, ma'am, or buenos dias, senora. Okay, and then the phrase for, would you like to look in my bag? And the final phrase on this sort of list was, may I lodge in your home for the night? The peddlers, because they had a weekly cycle and because they sold on the installment plan, tried to go to, they would go to the same house every day. So every Monday he had the homes he went to, every Tuesday, every Wednesday, and would try to organize their schedule so that the last home of the day, just as the sun was going down and it was time to think about a meal and sleeping, would be the nicest person, the one who would welcome them in. So all over the Peddler's New World, we have stories about that customer. It was usually, again, the woman of the household, who would say, yes, you may lodge here, and would you like to eat with the family? Now, I want to listen for a moment to one man, by the name of Mr. Yampolsky, who came from Bohemia to sell in Georgia, okay, state in the American South. And Mr. Yampolsky, who left a memoir, talked about a particularly nice family, the Bedfords, who did invite him in and served him a meal at the table. And he described it this way: Mr. Bedford asked me, where did I come from? What kind of country? What kind of city? Bedford had actually never heard of Bohemia. And so Yampolsky had to somehow explain to him, with the absence of an atlas, where Bohemia was. Yampolsky gave, and Mr. Yampolsky also asked him to write out his name, because Bedford said, I've never heard a name like Yampolsky. He said it was a crack jaw name. I guess it was hard for your jaws to say Yampolsky. So Yampolsky gave the Georgia farmer and his family, as best he could, a lesson in geography, an excursion to a place, Bohemia, where they would most likely never go. But Mr. Bedford posed another question to Peddler Yampolsky, one which non-Jewish customers asked around the peddler's globe, and which takes us back to food. What was my religion? Why didn't Jews believe in Jesus Christ? Queries about the Jews' Jewishness grew out of a sense of curiosity and amazement. It became a discussion, particularly over the matter of food. The wife who served, according to most accounts, that is, was the woman of the family, who was the one who decided to let the peddler in or not, allowed him to sleep over or not, invariably asked the peddler, like Mr. Yampolsky, would he care to eat with the family? For the Jewish peddler, this proved to be no simple matter. Some peddlers admitted in their narratives that after a day on the road, after lugging a huge backpack, they in fact decided they would eat anything and everything that would be offered to them if they could or could not eat it. If they actually adhered to the Jewish dietary laws, the peddler in fact should have eaten nothing. They should have said no to anything. He couldn't have even eaten kosher food off their plates, used their utensils, or consumed anything cooked or baked in their ovens. but life on the road made such punctiliousness difficult, if not impossible. Some peddlers in their narrative stated categorically that, in fact, they didn't care about kashrut, and they didn't even feel the need to justify their food choices. They just ate whatever appeared on the table and enjoyed a good home-cooked meal, thinking how much better it was than eating on the ground in some forest. Often self-described as religious back home, their journeys to the New World and away from their families allowed them to shed the restrictions to which they had previously adhered. Others, on the other hand, decided that when on the road, they could eat whatever they wanted or what they would define as whatever they needed, and that since peddling worked against the adherence to the dietary laws, they would resume the observance of dietary laws in that, for one thing, on the weekend when they went back to that center of Jewish life, and they would go back to keeping kosher when they could get off the road and open a store. So that this non-observance was situational. God Lerner in his talk talked about how kashrut could be a different stage in different people's lives. So for many of these peddlers, it was for the 5 days a week when they were out on the road. Most peddlers, at least a small number who have recorded their thoughts, or some cases customers have recalled their memories of the peddler, talked, however, about being uneasy about what was being served. They felt compelled to announce to their generous hosts that they couldn't eat this or they couldn't eat that. While grateful for the offer, they would have to say no to some or all of the foods on the table. Some of the peddlers actually carried a pot with them, and they'd say, if you let me stay here, I'll cook my own food. Okay? Or in other cases, they would leave a pot with their little mark on it at the customer's home. And so if Mr. Yampolsky, for example, came to the Bedford home on Wednesday, every Wednesday Mrs. Bedford would take out Yampolsky's pot, the one with a mark on it, and prepare maybe eggs, okay, or whatever else he had told her he could eat. Okay, and again, it's very interesting that the men often cooked for themselves. That is, they had their pot and they cooked for themselves, and clearly not feeling that men shouldn't cook. Okay, so there were various strategies that were implied. Often and usually, again, the peddlers refused anything other than fruit, vegetable, bread, or eggs. Such refusals must have amazed the customers, inevitably leading to another question. That is, if Mr. Yampolsky said, I can't eat bear or squirrel or pork or rabbit. In most cases, American diet was heavily based on pork. I mean, pork was the kind of architectural undergirding of the American diet. It inevitably led to the question, why not? Okay, after all, who would Mrs. Bedford have ever known who could say, my religion doesn't allow me to eat pork? That is, what religion did she know in which one couldn't have pork chops or ham or bacon? They certainly knew religious difference. They understood the divide between Catholics and Protestants. They understood the difference between Methodists and Presbyterians and Baptists and other Protestant denominations. They understood definite differences in race and nationality, but where in their cultural experiences would they have ever encountered people who claimed that religion forbade them from eating bacon and ham? So around the globe, be it Mr. Yampolsky in Georgia, or his equivalent in South Africa, his equivalent in Ireland, his equivalent in Cuba. Around the globe, the peddlers answered the women's question directly and straightforwardly. As a Jew, I cannot partake of this food. And the housewives who liked accommodating the peddlers, there seems to have been a very positive relationship between the peddlers and their female customers. These women went out of their way to meet the peddlers' dietary needs. Rather than taking offense at the peddlers' unwillingness to eat the family food, or appalled at the idea that somebody would say no to their home cooking, the women worked out ways to feed the peddlers, respectful of and learning about Jewish law. Numerous women, as described in memoirs, again kept a separate pot for the peddlers when he came by. He could fix his own food, and these Christian women in the process learned something about Judaism. Customers around the world asked about the Jewish dietary practices, and Peddlers' answers provided them with, we might say, one of their first lessons in comparative religion. The father of Leon Schwartz, who was a peddler, a man who peddled in Alabama after the Civil War, once, according to the family lore, if we believe the story or not is a question, because these are all memoirs, and so we have to trust that these happen since there's no written corroboration. According to family lore, Leon Schwartz's father, quote, sat down to eat in a farmhouse and was served pot liquor, fried bacon, and some greens served with side meat. The elder Schwartz, the peddler, either because he didn't care or because he was just so hungry, quote, pitched in and ate heartily. Surprised at his willingness to actually consume the food, his hostess interrogated him. Mr. Schwartz, I am surprised to see you eat pork. I thought Moses ordered the Jews not to eat any hog meat. As the story went, the peddler, surveying the table and seeing that there was in fact nothing but pork on the table, replied, ah, madam, if Moses had traveled to Perry County, Alabama, he would have never issued such an order. For their part, the peddlers often worried that by refusing the food that could be offered, they would offend their hosts. And they obviously didn't want to offend their host because the host was the person who was going to make a sale, was going to buy eyeglasses or a picture frame or a rug or a tablecloth or whatever. How the peddlers asked themselves in word and deed, could they stay true to Judaism's strictures and not engender the ill will among the women and men at whose tables they sat? How could they avoid snubbing their customers' hospitality? A memoir of a Jewish peddler in New Zealand told of a peddler who in 1863 came to an inn in a small town where, quote, where they put ham and eggs for breakfast on the table. The peddler, eager for a sale, and here he was interested not only selling to the person who owned the inn, but all the other people who were there, who he could actually multiply then his possible customers. The peddler, eager for a sale, tried to do nothing that could be defined as impolite. Quote, so when the proprietress left the room, he threw the unkosher food into the fire, and in an instant it blazed and set the fire to the chimney, and there was great consternation. Now, most did, as gleaned from these first-hand accounts written by both peddlers and customers and also offered in oral histories of former peddlers, not only tried to adhere to the rules as they could, but freely discussed with their host family what the laws were, where they came from, and why. That is, they, rather than hide, rather than saying, I'm not hungry, they very openly and forthrightly described themselves as Jews who could not eat these laws as specified in their religion. By explaining the laws of kashrut in the context of showing why he would only eat an egg, the peddler served as a kind of interpreter of Judaism. He exposed his customers to the inner workings of religious tradition, which they did not know, which was far beyond anything they had been exposed to. And if they knew it only from the pages of the Hebrew Bible and not as something lived by real breathing human beings. In the matter of Jewish food, or food consumed by Jews, or food that Jews believed they ought to consume, the peddler helped shape the process of Jewish integration into all the lands whose names I rattled off a few minutes ago. In all of these places, some more than others, Jewish men came to enjoy rights, political rights, in the course of a very short period of time, and came to be, certainly in the matter of the law, equal to all other men of that place and possessors of citizenship. In one way or another, again, as it varied from place to place, Jews began to be viewed as people who were not to be seen as suspicious, as aliens, as outsiders, as non-Christians. Jews who had previously been unknown as perhaps people of mythic proportion, maybe guilty of the deicide and in league with Satan, were now the men who had lodged in their homes, who had sat by them at the table, who had sat with them by the fireplace in the evening, who talked openly and freely about their religion and described what they ate and what they did not eat and why. There's also a great deal of commentary in these memoirs also about the host family observing the Jewish man at prayer in the morning. And again, finding this utterly startling that a man would wrap himself in a shawl with a white shawl with blue stripes and put leather boxes on his forehead and on his arm. In one case, in a memoir written by a customer, she said this man, she woke up in the morning and she saw him putting leather around his head, and she thought he was actually trying to strangle himself. She ran up to her husband and said, "The peddler's trying to kill himself." Okay, and he had to explain to her, no, this is actually how Jewish men pray in the morning. So the peddler who had lodged in the customer's home, who explained what he ate and what he did not eat, how he prayed and why he prayed that way, helped demystify the idea of the Jew. The customs of the Jews, like the Jews themselves, came to be considered normal and not aberrant, worthy of respect rather than demonization. Now, we cannot know in any way with any precision what role those meals and those explanations to the customers by the Jews, what role that played in forging the relatively quick process of integration of Jews into nearly all of these places, how that food encounter facilitated the positive feelings which flourished between the egg eaters, okay, and their hosts. But the encounter over food is suggestive, and that the Jews' pride in talking about what he was, what he did, what he believed, and why he ate that way erased barriers that in the old world continued to be a much more tortured, engendered a much more tortured process towards integration. So I want to end this with a brief literary text, poem, a very lengthy poem written by an East European immigrant Jew who briefly peddled when he first came to the American South. The author of Kentucky by I.J. Schwartz tapped into this sentiment as he depicted his peddler character, Josh. Schwartz's book-length poem juxtaposed the misery of life on the road with the local residents' warm embrace of the peddlers. Schwartz presented Josh of the, quote, red pointed beard, the eyes strained and bloodshot, obviously a miserable existence, walking the road, okay, a suffering man, miserable on the road, exhausted. Josh knocked on a cabin door, looking to make a sale and looking for a place to rest for the night. A farmer loaded with a gun, armed with a loaded gun, opened the door, and in answer to the question, "Who are you?" Josh replied, "A Jew who seeks a place to rest his head." Rather than pumping Josh full of buckshot or throwing him out into the night, the farmer put down his gun, offering the peddler a meal, a bed, and human companionship. Over the course of the poem's next few verses, the farmer and his wife lay out a table which Josh explains he can only eat little of because of his religious principles, but what he could eat, he did. His hosts observed him in prayer and then eagerly looked through his merchandise, inviting the neighbors to come in and also delight in what Josh carried in his bag. After this one night in the poem, the local people were so excited about Josh and who he was that they encouraged him to get off the road, stay in the town, open a store, and sell the stuff he'd been carrying on his back from behind the counter of a little shop. They invite him to become part of their community. In the various places to which the peddlers went, Judaism, Jewish life planted itself. Jews became, in larger or smaller numbers, elements in the local population. Their synagogues and cemeteries, schools, and other institutions took their places as institutions that then dotted the local landscapes of the New World. In nearly all of these New World places, they came to be seen as a respectable and basically acceptable element of the local population. Nearly all of the Jewish population centers in the New World, the United States, Canada, England, the rest of the British Isles, South Africa, Australia, Latin America, parts of Central America, cannot be disassociated from the history of global Jewish peddling. Common themes, common processes, a common schedule, common goods. They sold the same things wherever they went. Common concerns linked these places and made the history of any one place not all that different than the basic contours of another. These universals or commonalities connected the experience of being a Jewish peddler, let's say at the tip of the Cape of Good Hope, to the experience of being a Jewish peddler in Newfoundland, or the tip of Cape Horn with that of Alaska. Yet local stories of Jewish migration, Jewish peddling, yes, they also deserve to be told, but the commonalities far outweigh the differences. And in all of these places, food had to be negotiated for. In all of these places, peddling history, in all these peddling histories, food loomed large as both a matter of personal crisis and personal choice for the peddlers and a matter of negotiation between peddler and customer. Jewish peddlers, differently than those Jewish immigrants who settled in large cities, went to work in Jewish industries, who lived in Jewish neighborhoods, and never went out on the road, never had this chance to have this kind of intense in the home, at the table encounter with non-Jews, those Jews who remained in the big cities, those Jews who did not become peddlers, never got to be egg eaters. Thank you.
So we now have time for questions and answers, and I will turn it over to the audience. And maybe I should add one thing, because it might be, from what we've talked about, it might seem as if Jews today do and conform to all of the strictures, which would depend very much on the country you're in and the branch of Judaism that you connect to. So in the United States, what would we say, 10 to 11% are Orthodox? Mm-hmm. Would you agree, something like that? And so that those would be some of the people that Hasia described, the men who pray in the morning and who wear the shawl and the leather. But it's not as if every Jewish male does that. I think it's important to realize that there are different branches of Judaism today in many countries that follow the strict as they believe they can get. It's certainly not like in the Middle Ages or whatever. And then those who are more liberal in their understanding and in their behavior. So I think that would be an important thing to mention. But questions? Not all at once. Would anybody here on the panel want to add something more general about what the three of you have said? You certainly all had pork in common.
All pork.
and the calisthenics around pork. Here in the third row, please.
Hi. For the third review of the essay. Oh, thank you. I just wanted to know, so the towns that the peddlers were going to, did the people who took them in and showed them hospitality, did they start to adjust to the peddlers? Did they start acquiring dishes that were kosher? Did they start providing more food that they could consume?
Okay, so I think what you're asking is, did the customers develop any taste for Jewish food, or?
Not so much that. Did they adjust? So did they start to adjust to make it more comfortable for the Jewish people to stay there? Okay,
great. So yes, so for example, the housewife who would keep a pot in her house and allow the peddler to cook for himself, or when she knew the peddler was coming on a particular day, she would prepare something in that one pot that he could eat.
So was that more common as time went on?
Oh, I see what your question. yes, in a way, the longer the peddler was going there, to that particular home, the more that became part of her routine. And as people, in a sense, accustomed themselves, again, the non-Jewish customers accustomed themselves to knowing about Jews, they became more self-conscious that this is something they ought to do, and that they assumed that this is what the peddlers would want. And so that, in a sense, I see this as part of this process by which they came to accept Jews, and they're oddities. I mean, again, it seems really odd if you are, again, a Dutch Reform farmer in South Africa to think about this. That this became a kind of way that they understood that these were not so much oddities as just another kind of religious experience.
Thank you.
Here in the middle.
The question is to all of you. Based on the history of Jewish, like if you can see where they are coming from, migrating from this place, expelled, those types of things. And we've seen the reformists coming out and the conservatives out of the Orthodox. I mean, is this to create the new Jewish cuisines which all want them to be accommodated wherever they go? Because as you can see that things which were considered kosher, non-kosher now is considered kosher because like pork and other things. Is this the way that the Jewish people trying to fit in the new world, in fact, or the modern world?
Okay, I'll speak it because I understand my genre is the Soviet, and the Soviet immigration that is very significant only in the New York area, as far as I can understand. There are about 400,000 immigrants from, or children of immigrants from the Soviet Union nowadays, and of course in the United States in general it's very significant. In Israel, in Germany, the majority, I believe close to 90% of the Jewish community is from the former Soviet Union, and so on. So about your question, I think it's very interesting. Actually, I don't have any figures about two currents, but certainly there are two currents of accommodation and integration. One of them is to become more Jewish, to follow the model of the Orthodox Jewry, especially as some of the Orthodox currents in the United States are very active among the former Soviet Jews, in particular the Lubavitch movement is very active and successful in attracting people to the Orthodox kind of Jewishness, and as a result of coming back to the tradition of not eating pork, of not eating rabbits, of not eating many other things, and in general behaving according to the rules. At the same time, a very significant, and again, without any statistics, but presumably the majority, they carry a sort of peddlers. They carry the recipes of their Soviet cuisine. And for example, in New York, the area that I mentioned, the Brighton Beach, it's statistically, I believe it's about 40,000 people from the former Soviet Union. So about 10% of the entire Russian-speaking community of New York is concentrated in this Brighton Beach. But it's the main shopping area. It's the area where Jews come, I mean the former Soviet Jews come maybe once a week, twice a week, or maybe every second week to shop, to take the food that their stomach can consume, yeah, their stomach can stomach, yeah, and also they also, if it's a wedding, if it's something, a celebration, a jubilee or so on, the place to celebrate it is in this area with the traditional food. There is also a concept that American women are not able to cook. You know, maybe it's in the current of the slow food, yes, that they're too fast, you know, to produce something. And so as a result, there is the preservation of the Soviet tradition, plus at the same time, and even in the immigrant press, you can find that, look, if you use the American salt, you have to do it twice because it's not as salty as our salt. Yeah, or if you use sugar or something. So how to use the American ingredients to cook the traditional food, but also step by step accepting the mainstream food, including, of course, what is crazy is sushi. Sushi is really Soviet, this immigrant cuisine nowadays. Why? I don't know. Yes, yeah, this is sushi. Whatever. So there are two things, more Jewish and more mainstream preserving the tradition. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to try to answer it. So I would say that, you know, not just now, but looking backwards, there was always a process of trying to negotiate, like, and to ask on an individual level, on a family level, on a community level, what are the boundaries? What can we and what can we not do? And there's, on the one hand, you can't say there's ever a universal response, but rather we could look at certain patterns. And again, for some individuals, it was, as Professor Estra said, people would actually try, with the encroachment of modernity, actually try to become more strict. Okay, and in some ways, the food practices of the Orthodox in the United States are actually much stricter now than they were 30 years ago or 50 years ago. Okay, so that as they see modernity and the attractiveness of the food culture of the larger society and the penetration, you know, the fact that Jews are so freely accepted in the larger society, that they feel they have to build thicker and thicker walls. And so 40 years ago, there was no such thing in the United States as kosher milk. Because milk that had a stamp on the bottle, okay, or on the carton. And now in some Orthodox neighborhoods, that's all you can buy is milk that is certified, that the farmer and the cows and so on, you know, that there was never anything unkosher involved in the process. Or it is now, in, again, some communities, unacceptable to eat broccoli. Okay, so broccoli is now defined as unkosher because inside the little flowerlets of the broccoli, and because it's green, so it's kind of dark, you couldn't see small bugs. And the bugs are unkosher. Okay, cauliflower is okay because it's white, and you could see if there was some little dark, creepy thing inside the cauliflower. So this was not a standard that existed 40 years ago. Or 60. Oh, and so in New York a couple years ago, there was actually a rabbi who spoke only for his little community, and I don't even know if they followed him, but he said that the New York City water was unkosher because there were small microbes, and these not microbes, tiny crustaceans, okay, and therefore the water was rendered unkosher. And now others said, well, if it can't be seen with the human eye, it doesn't count. Okay, if you can't see it, it doesn't matter. I should also say a certain amount, or maybe a lot of corruption that's involved. And so sometimes, you know, why start telling your community that it has to have, the milk has to have the stamp? Well, because you're going to make money on it. Okay, but on the other hand, there are multiple other kinds of negotiations. So it became not uncommon by, I'd say, the 1920s, 1930s, that Jews, again, as they began to feel more and more comfortable in American society, would develop a kind of double consciousness, and they'd say, our home is kosher. We keep a kosher home, but we'll eat out, and we'll kind of eat anything out. Or we'll eat out, but we'll eat chicken and beef, but we won't eat pork. Okay. Now, in fact, the unkosher beef slaughtered in an unkosher manner is no less unkosher than pork. It's the same thing, but these are the negotiations people Okay, some individual Jews made for themselves, and that, for example, is a fairly common one. You mentioned the Reform movement. So the Reform movement, as early as the 1880s, declared, look, at these laws were meaningful in the past. They were meaningful in ancient times, but they do not serve any purpose in the modern world of 1885, and they exist only to keep Jews apart from other people, so we declare them no longer binding. Okay, we don't have anything to do with them. Okay, later on, and again, you mentioned the conservative movement. So the conservative movement said, well, how do we find ways to adhere to the law, but still make it possible for Jews to function in the real world? And so they would look at various items, cheese. Okay, and can Jews eat cheese? Well, some people, the rabbis generally said no, because it was made with rennet, which was this enzyme that made the cheese, the dairy congeal into cheese. They said, well, no, cheese, we've consulted with scientists, and rennet is okay because it's just a chemical. It's no longer, it came from the stomach of from a cow's stomach, and therefore it'd be a meat product. So it's all these different negotiations, and every possible permutation of this, as I think, again, God Lerner talked about people who say, look, I'll eat bacon, but I won't eat pork chops. Okay, I'll eat shrimp, but I won't eat lobster. Now, there's no difference between bacon and pork chop other than that individual, that family said, okay, some of this makes sense, or some of this feels right, and so I'll do what I think just resonates with me. So, no single answer.
Laura, did you have
Yeah, I don't have much to add to what was said. Just one observation, maybe trying to look at things from the other direction. America is very unique. In most big and medium-sized cities in America, you can go and eat in a Jewish neighborhood, and everybody can eat there, Jews, non-Jews, and I think that's very unique. The idea that you can go in the ghetto of Rome and eat Jewish food, and even if you don't know Jewish, but people will do that. Again, Lerner was talking about Krakow, but I think that doesn't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, you guys can't hear me?
We'll talk a little louder.
I think that doesn't happen in most places. I grew up in Antwerp, where there are a couple of very good Jewish restaurants, and I don't think many non-Jewish people from Antwerp or Belgium would go and eat there. And I guess I just wonder why, maybe it's Jews not marketing their cuisine as something that can, that concern about how do we negotiate it with ourselves, but why not market it as one of an ethnic cuisine that in fact people could try. I mean, how many people here have eaten Jewish food or in a Jewish restaurant? Okay, that's pretty good.
They're
All right.
foodies.
Yeah, they're foodies. All right.
Actually, ask how many were Americans.
Oh, how many of you are Americans?
Oh.
All right. I think there's a Jewish restaurant in Turin, right?
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
going
yeah.
there. So if you haven't, if you're here for a few more months, maybe it's a culinary experience to try.
I think, you could take something as prosaic in America as the bagel.
Right.
There's a food, that's, it certainly never had the importance in East European Jewish baking that it does in America, but bagels are about now one of the most widely eaten foods in America. There was a time when a fast food restaurant had a restaurant was called Roy Rogers, and it had a bagel made with Canadian bacon, cheese, and egg. But I think most people are conscious. I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb. I mean, I think that most Americans, non-Jews, know that a bagel is a Jewish food, and that there's something kind of voyeuristic about it. There's something, it's again about that accepting that Jews are part of the American landscape. And so, yeah, just like Americans eat pizza, Americans eat Chinese food. So the bagel becomes the sort of Jewish contribution to the American diet.
To America.
Yeah, so that may be, and you know, you can, again, and I think not just New York, if somebody says, oh, I'll have a bagel with a schmear. So schmear means spread, and it's, you know, a bagel with cream cheese. Okay, and so here's somebody, you know, living in Iowa, who knows, you know, who'll use this Yiddish word schmear, and it is utterly and thoroughly integrated into the American cuisine and to the American vocabulary.
Sure. And I believe what is also very common nowadays is the phenomenon of caddies. Of what you call the replacement. Because recently I heard from one of my colleagues, and he's right, and who is very kosher, and he told me that, look, nowadays it's very difficult to find in New York Jewish food, Jewish kosher food, meaning that you can find a kosher Chinese, you can find easily a kosher Japanese, you can find a kosher, whatever. But really, kosher Jewish is maybe this divide between Jewish and kosher. It becomes narrow, and quite often, if it's really Jewish, it's very expensive.
Yeah.
So this is also.
Other questions or comments?
Actually, you know, I'm going to throw in a story. Okay, so this is, you know, since few people had personal, God Learner started it, so I'll have it also. And again, it offers us a site where Jews and non-Jews met over food, not just in the Peddling. So it was, you know, the common experience, really from the turn of the century, probably until fairly recently, that girls in you know, 7th, 8th grade had to take cooking in school, in public school. So home economics, it was called, and this was you know, part of the curriculum, and so I had to take it, and it was a way to. I learned about all sorts of foods I had never heard of, and many of them were you know, totally kosher, like cinnamon toast or melted cheese melted over bread. But the teacher announced, next week we're making bacon and eggs. And so, you know, everybody's looking at everybody else, and what are we going to do about this? And like, how are we going to negotiate this? Even though we, I'm sure, didn't know the word negotiate. And so one girl raised her hand and said, Mrs. Kroll, I want to tell you, some of us can't eat bacon. Okay, and kind of like the housewives who met the peddlers, Mrs. Kroll said, why not? Say, well, you know, some of us are Jewish and you're not allowed to eat bacon. And so first Mrs. Kroll said, how many girls won't eat the bacon? So, and again, apropos to your comment, I'd say half kept their hands down and half put their hands up. So this classmate said, and now this is again in line with so many of the other themes, girl said, there's something you can buy in the store, and it's called kosher bacon. And then what it was beef. It was beef strips, and it was definitely kosher, but it looked like bacon, and it would be fried up like bacon, and theoretically it could function next to your eggs. So long as the eggs didn't have milk in it, you could have the beef strip, or the, quote, kosher bacon. And so now, how typical, how untypical, this wasn't a particularly progressive environment. Mrs. Kroll put her hand in her wallet and took out money and gave it to this girl and said, why don't you buy some kosher bacon and bring it in on Monday, and those girls who don't want to eat the bacon can have their own tables and then be part of the lesson. So it was a kind of, you know, interesting. At the time, it was only a matter of embarrassment and awkwardness, and like, I want to get out of this classroom. It's too uncomfortable. But looking back on it, it actually opens up for thinking, and I think also, by the way, for research, the ways in which the larger society did accommodate. And again, from the women in the homes to Mrs. Kroll at Steuben Junior High School, and when the United States Army began to, and I assume the armies of some of the other European countries began to offer kosher food to soldiers in World War I, and then in many of the other wars. federal prisons will now offer kosher food, so that there was a way in which these strictures, which are really about, again, keeping Jews apart, have in some places, and again, to think of it in comparative terms, did this happen in Europe and where and when, provide ways for thinking about the accommodation and you know, how unique was the United States, or how much is this represented in other countries as well.
I think actually you could add halal to that, to prisons.
Airline food, right?
Yeah.
That's right. So you go on an airline.
Yeah, and also universities.
Yeah.
University cafeterias, the kosher section, the halal section.
Right.
And then the other section. I guess we have 1 more minute, so 1 more question and a short answer. Yeah, in the back. Dominique.
Still about the peddlers, the women that invited the Jewish people in, how was the reaction of their community? Because I guess that they had their own religion, so Protestants or something. How was the reaction? Yeah.
Great, the reaction of their own community. Well, all the local merchants hated the Jewish peddlers. Okay, and they didn't hate them because they were Jews. They hated them because they were merchant. You know, they would come in to sell this items that for much less money, they were much less expensive to the women in their own homes. And so there were, I would say every place, political actions taken against the peddlers to try to impose very high fees for peddler's license and to engage in other kinds of you know, sort of legislative acts to make it harder for them to sell. There were always rumors that the Jewish peddlers were coming into the home and seducing the women. There was certainly a sexual kind of subtext in terms of stories told about peddlers, and most of these seem to have been generated by the merchants who, again, didn't want the peddlers there. They never worried about the Jews trying to convert the these Christian women to Judaism. I mean, in a sense, that was never a problem. And it was more striking to me how I saw no peddlers who claimed that their customers tried to convert them to Christianity, which was, in a way, a kind of something that went on in cities all the time. So, but you know, there was certainly talk that women were being disloyal to their own kind. Irish women were being disloyal to Irish merchants. French-Canadian women were being disloyal to their French-Canadian Catholic, you know, merchants by shopping from the Jews. But the women continued to shop with the Jews, even when there was organized protest.
So, thank you very much for a very, very interesting